Well, thank you so much for joining all of us. It is my great pleasure to introduce Megha Majumdar, the debut author of A Burning, universally acclaimed. It's one of the most anticipated and one of the most wonderfully reviewed books of the year by James Wood in the New Yorker, in the New York Times, Oprah Magazine, Vogue, the Wall Street Journal. I loved this. Our booksellers love this, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Megha Majumdar to Northshire Live.
Thank you so much, David. That was a very generous introduction. I appreciate it.
Of course, I'm happy. I realized I didn't ask you before. Would you like to read a short passage from A Burning before we start the interview? Or
whatever you think is best. I'm happy to do a short reading, or I'm happy to dive in if you prefer.
Well, yeah, give us a little bit tell us a little,
okay.
A quick pitch about the book, and then give us a 5 minutes reading, and then we can talk about it.
Sounds great. So my novel is called A Burning. It came out in June, and it's the story of three people in India who are chasing big dreams while the society around them makes this really dangerous turn toward right-wing nationalism. And I can tell you very quickly about the three people. So there's the central character, who is a young woman who all she wants is to rise to the middle class and support her parents, but she makes this careless and politically risky comment on Facebook and gets in trouble for it. The second character is her former school teacher, who feels that in his work as a teacher, he's not really having the kind of vigorous impact on the nation that he might have dreamed of. And so he becomes involved in the workings of this political party, and he has to make some difficult moral choices. And the third character is a person who lives on the very margins of society. And from that place, she dreams of becoming a movie star and goes to these weekly amateur acting lessons in order to pursue that dream. So that's the book, and I can give you a little taste of it if you like. I can just read for a couple minutes from the beginning, which follows the central character. Her name is Jeevan. "You smell like smoke," my mother said to me. So I rubbed an oval of soap in my hair and poured a whole bucket of water on myself before a neighbor complained that I was wasting the morning supply. There was a curfew that day. On the main street, a police jeep would creep by every half hour. Daily wage laborers compelled to work would come home with arms raised to show they had no weapons. In bed, my wet hair spread on the pillow. I picked up my new phone, purchased with my own salary, screen guard still attached. On Facebook, there was only one conversation. These terrorists attacked the wrong neighborhood. The more I scrolled, the more Facebook unrolled. The night before, I had been at the railway station, no more than a 15-minute walk from my house. I ought to have seen the men who stole up to the open windows and threw flaming torches into the halted train, but all I saw were carriages burning, their doors locked from the outside and dangerously hot. The fire spread to huts bordering the station, smoke filling the chests of those who lived there. More than 100 people died. The government promised compensation to the families of the dead, 80,000 rupees, which, well, the government promises many things. In a video, to the dozen microphones thrust at his chin, the chief minister was saying, "Let the authorities investigate." Somebody had spliced this comment with a video of policemen scratching their heads. It made me laugh. I admired these strangers who said anything they wanted to. They were not afraid of making jokes. Whether it was about the police or the ministers, they had their fun. And wasn't that freedom? I'll pause there.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. So the plot of this novel, Facebook, terrorism. It seems pulled from the times that we're living in. Tell me about how you were able to construct this. I just have one more thing to just go off about the novel. I just love it. You've got these three characters and how they are tied together in this case. It's just, I think it's beautifully constructed. And you create it, and how did you come up with it? I mean, how did you create this carefully construction? It's brilliant, I think.
Thank you so much. I think, I wanted to ask how people live within such an oppressive and discriminatory society, and so the three characters and that structure of like these three characters, and it's kind of braided together, that came from this place of wanting to ask specific questions. So one was how people who work really hard and really earnestly can still be thwarted by the systems and the institutions that they live within. And then what do you do? What resources do you marshal? Like, what do you have to move forward? Then another question that I had was, in a society with huge power differentials, if you get a little taste of political power, what will you do in order to get more? When you realize that your life can change, you can ascend above the common person and have access to power and resources in a way that other people in this society do not have. What morals will you hold on to, and what will you give up? So those were some of the questions that I really wanted to ask, and I channeled those questions through these characters. And, I was writing from a place where I was very attentive to what was happening in India. India is where I grew up, and I was looking at how people are responding to this current right-wing government, how they are using things like social media, and sometimes they are used by those things too. And so just kind of looking at what was happening in India. And of course, the strange thing is that the book has come out in the US this summer, where all of these questions, I think, feel very pertinent.
Thank you. Yeah, it is really so blisteringly topical. And I think that this leads in well to my next question. And his sort of glowing New Yorker review, James Wood said that the book's surface realism is abundant and busy and life-sown, but the system that it once supports and undermines this diverse vitality is seen with an unrelentingly cold, authorial eye, and its small and large corruption, its frozen inequality, murderous racism, political opportunism, and unalleviated poverty. Your depiction of Jivan's life, it's harrowing. The slums that she created that are there. How was it writing about those? How was it? What kind of did you do to sort of describe these? I thought it was remarkably done. Please tell me more.
I wonder if anybody in the room has traveled to India. No. Well, maybe someday, but there's just so much visual richness there, and I wanted to have some of that in the book. So on the street, you might have a fruit seller who sits at the corner every day, and you develop a relationship with them. You might get on a train and, somebody's saying they have family from there. That's really cool. So, you might get on a train, and rather than seeing just kind of rows of seats, you might see that there's a vendor selling snacks. You might see that the capacity of the coach is maybe 50 people, but there are definitely more than 50 people, crowded in there. So that kind of richness I wanted to have in the book. And I felt like that was where I had fun. I have all of these memories from growing up there. I lived there until I was 19, and I wanted to have not just the visual detail, but also that sense of humor and spirit and hustle almost. It's a place where a lot of systems don't work. but people make them work, you know? So you have to move forward with this kind of inventiveness and this very particular intelligence, because you know that none of these systems will work for you. You know, you have unreliable, let's say in this novel, you have unreliable water supply. You have a doctor who doesn't believe you when you say that you think you're injured. So like, what do you do? How do you move forward? So that texture and you know, visual busyness felt like part of making that world come alive. Do you, Dafith, do you write as well?
I don't.
You don't? Okay.
I do not. No.
I was going to turn the question back on you and ask you about description.
I'm sorry, no good there. I planned this carefully, but actually, you unplanned. You brought out humor, and I think that's a great point that I had neglected to make in my introduction or in my questions. The novel weds this really rough, terrible stuff. This vision of income inequality just is rampant, with a great sense of humor. How was it? How did you do that? How did you pull these things together, make them coexist?
So there's a character in the book who I think brings most of the humor in the book, and it's the character who dreams of being a movie star and goes to these acting classes. And I think humor can be a form of resistance when you are living in a place where you feel the full might of this state. And you see that it is not a state which cares about your well-being. It is not a state which cares whether you have the resources you need to live meaningfully and to live with joy. Then you have to make your own ways forward, and you have to meet these barriers with a sense of humor. Otherwise, it's very hard to move forward. And so I think that kind of humor comes from a place of being challenged repeatedly. It comes from a place of being shamed, which I think, you know, is something that a lot of women, certainly a lot of women in India would, I think, relate to. Is you might find that it's a society which seeks to shame you, you know, which seeks to say you cannot follow certain ambitions or you cannot live in a certain way. And that shame is like an oppressive force upon you. So how do you push back? You know, you do it by teasing people and joking with people and with humor, you know? So I think that is what this character at least turns to. And I'm glad it comes through, because I hope that the humor in the book is not just, you know, funny, but it's also a mode of living with joy and with spirit.
I think you're right. I mean, the character of Love, this character Lovely, who just is able to turn things around. She's cast down so frequently, and yet is able to come around and have a happy face and keep having her dreams. She's this she's a real joyful sinner of the novel, and now she's a hijra. Am I pronouncing that correctly? And could you tell us a little bit about that? She's a transgender, and they have their own sort of school or place. I'd like to know a little bit more about the social context.
Right. So she belongs to a community of Hijra people who, you know, it's a very particular social category in South Asia. So it's a little hard to map it exactly onto North American or Western categories. But I think, you know, it's a category which is at the intersection of gender and religion and certainly class. And she lives with a group of other hijras who make their living from begging on the trains, in the streets. They go perform at ceremonies. They are believed to have a sort of close connection to the divine. So they are much sought after for blessing newborns and blessing couples at weddings. So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect of it is that she's also reviled. It is this very strange kind of marginal position where you have some you have some connection to the divine, but at the same time, you know, if she is standing in front of a store, the store owner might tell her, well, please move because no customers are going to come if you stand here. So people want her to get away. And so living in that place, I think she is someone who, you know, again, her humor connects very much to being in that place.
Thank you. And I'd like to turn to Jivan briefly here. She's this Muslim girl from just inconceivable poverty. And you thrust her into this moment where she's encountered this terrorism going on, this train station. She's made this Facebook comment, which in the atmosphere it is, it's totally destructive. But the way you reveal her story to us, I think is really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about how you bring us to her past and how we see her childhood and what her parents have gone through, and like, as you mentioned, her father's wounds and sickness.
Sorry, Daphne, you cut out for a bit. Would you repeat the question?
Yes,
just the last bit?
Certainly. How did you got this structure? She's in prison, and she's got then this reporter that comes to ask her about her story, and you then reveal her life. I thought it was a great way of showing what she went through. And that's not really a question; it's more of a comment, honestly.
I'm glad it worked for you.
Pardon?
I'm glad that narrative worked for you.
Thank you. So moving on to the character of P.T. Sir, he struck me as, it's not exactly an alt-right troll, but that's too much. But he is tempted by this what's right-wing anti-Muslim nationalism, and you mentioned a little bit about it earlier. Why is his narrative structured differently from everyone else's?
That's a great question. So P.T. Sir, he's a character who, his name is P.T. Sir because that's what we used to call our gym teachers, our physical education teachers, like physical training teacher, P.T. Sir. So he is, you know, one reason that he is perhaps a little bit apart is that the other two characters are written in the first person. So they're written as like I characters, and he is in the third person because I really wanted the reader to have empathy for him and see what he's doing, but at the same time to have a little bit of critical distance from him, you know, to see this teacher who starts doing kind of more and more dangerous things and starts making more and more morally questionable choices, and for the reader to see, well, what would I do in that position? You know, I really tried to resist writing a flat villain. I felt like that would be really boring for the reader and it would be boring for me to write. So I never wanted to write somebody who's just like a bad person, but I wanted to write somebody who is an ordinary person who wants to give his family a better life. And what that might look like is, you know, getting drawn into the activities of this party, which is doing, you know, really questionable things. So when will you, if you are in that position where it's between betterment for yourself and doing the right thing for other people, is there a point at which you will assert your morals and say, okay, I'm not going to do that. I am going to sacrifice, I don't know, a chance at a better life for myself and my family because I cannot live with the ethics of that, you know? And if there is such a point, where is that point, you know? So I wanted to see this person who actually the whole time he thinks that he is acting from a place of patriotism and trying to do the right thing, but maybe he's making mistakes.
As a reader, I certainly, as I was going along with his narrative, I sort of saw his disaffection initially as sort of shame at having to mess with the microphone and be the man that comes in and fixes these things for the other school teachers. But then you're confronted as a reader with where would you stop doing these things? What you put into these situations, and you have to, as a reader, have to confront that yourself. I thought it was good. Now, after attending Harvard, you did graduate work at Johns Hopkins in social anthropology. Did that, or how did that contribute to the writing of A Burning?
That's a great question. I also just saw that somebody in the chat, Jennifer, thank you for this really nice comment. And Cindy just said that their daughter is from Gujarat. That's nice to know. Anthropology. You know, has anybody in the room taken anthropology classes or studied anthropology? Rachel, you have. Oh, a bunch of people have. Okay, so yes, Cynthia has. A bunch of people have. So you know that, you know, anthropology is all about listening to other people's stories. You know, it's so much about going into communities that are different from yours and really listening to other people's stories and perspectives and allowing room for surprise and complexity and nuance. And I felt like, you know, I got to do some really enriching things. Like one summer I was in Senegal when I was in grad school, and I followed this USAID project, which was putting computers in public schools for the first time. And I was looking at how teachers and students are using those computers. And it was so interesting to go there, especially from the US, where, you know, people talk about trying to get away from screens, and you know, everybody's tired of their screens. But you know, to be in that place where I saw so many people talk about computers as these instruments which would open up so many opportunities for them. You know, people were talking about researching scholarships and like schools and that kind of thing. So to be in that place where the computer once again became a thing of reverence and hope. So, you know, being attentive to different perspectives is what anthropology is all about. And I felt that that is such a valuable lesson for a fiction writer. You know, how do you write perspectives with complexity? How do you make sure that you are not flattening people's stories? You are not turning them into what you expect, but you are allowing your characters to surprise you, to behave in ways that might be counterintuitive for you, but that make perfect sense for them. So I think that complexity and depth, my studies in anthropology have definitely nudged me to pay attention to that.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like that's the great gift of fiction. It gives us more life, more perspectives. There's a great question in here in the chat.
Daphis, I think you froze for me.
I think Daphis might be frozen for everybody, so I'm going to jump in with a couple of great questions that got sent to me in the chat from Arlene. She had a whole bunch of questions, so I'm going to jump in with her first one, which is, what was the most challenging aspect in writing this book and the whole writing process? And I actually want to just add on to that. This is a debut, and you know, it's a debut that has been met with glowing critical acclaim that everyone's been so ecstatic about, that doesn't really feel like a debut in the way it came out. So I would also love to hear about, you know, the work process that went into it a bit.
I wrote this book over 4 years, and I think what was hard was, you know, so much of writing feels like confronting your own failures every day. You have a vision in your head of how you think a scene might play out, or how you want a certain chapter to feel. And then you try meeting the vision that you have in your head, and maybe the words on the page just fall short. And so it can be kind of hard being in that place of confronting your failures every day and coming back to pages that don't feel good, coming back to sentences that you think are so clumsy, you know, coming back to a page that you feel, you know, it's not, maybe there's a stretch of dialogue that you think is clunky and doesn't sound like how people would speak. So there are all of these, there are so many ways in which, as a writer, you have to sit with failure, face your own failure every day. And you have to do that for a period of years until it starts getting good, or at least until it starts getting to this place where you think the book is saying what you want it to say. For me, that was very important to ask, you know, is this book saying what I want it to say? And you know, it was also, it involved asking a lot of hard questions. I revised and rewrote a lot. It's hard for me to even say, you know, I wrote this many drafts because I don't know where one draft ends and the next one begins. I'm constantly rewriting. But to look at your pages at some point and say, is this boring? Like when I'm rereading and I come to a scene or I come to a chapter, and if I feel like putting my own book down and looking at my phone, then that's terrible because my book is boring me, you know? And then you have to think about, well, why is this section boring? Maybe it's boring because I am lingering in a scene too long. Maybe it's boring because it's repetitive. Maybe it's boring because something is unclear. I think that was also something that I worked really hard on is the story clear? And it feels like a very basic question, but it's something that I face in my work as an editor is, you know, books can be very immersive and just have a lot of energy, but sometimes you find that the basics are not clear. Who are these people and why should we care about them given that you made them up, you know? So I think answering that kind of harsh question for my own book felt really important to me.
My internet's back. And that is another thing I should have mentioned in the introduction. You're an editor at the Press Catapult. What other ways does that work bleed into you as a writer besides asking these questions of your novel?
I think it has definitely made me a sharper reader. I know what kind of ambition and movement in a book excites me. And then I have something pretty concrete in my own work to reach for. And, you know, while revising, I think I was able to be much more attentive to things like pacing. Because of my work as an editor, where I read manuscripts which have different kinds of pace. And for this book, for instance, it felt really important to me to have a pretty fast pace, because one of my goals was I wanted to see if I could write a book that's that has something serious, that has something intellectually serious to say, but that's also entertaining. And I wondered if I could do it. And part of making it entertaining to me felt like I needed to have a book that moves really swiftly. And in order to have a book that moves really swiftly, you need to make sure that each sentence is doing certain work, like either it's moving your narrative forward or it's helping you dig down into a character or something like that. So I think articulating those goals for myself, being an editor really helped. And then of course, you know, there's other ways in which it helps. One big one is that I get to work with writers who, you know, you basically, as an editor, you take on writers who, when you read their work, you want to put everything else down and you want to press that manuscript into people's hands and say, read this right now. It is so good. You know, it will break your heart or dazzle you or, you know, whatever it made you feel. And to be in that place where you can then work so closely with the writer. You can then help them restructure the book maybe, or you can help them go over certain sections and say, what is this book trying to do? And what are the ways in which it can do that better? You learn so much from being so close to brilliant minds.
So I have another question that Arlene had asked, which is, I'm actually going to combine two parts of her question. One, what was the most surprising part of this writing process to you? And then what lessons did you learn from each of the three main characters as you worked?
Oh, that's a tough question. So what was surprising? I think I'm a little bit stunned that I wrote a book. You know, it's as I said, it's a long and often tedious journey. It's just you in a chair in front of a computer. Doesn't look very interesting. You kind of, sometimes you spend hours just looking at the same paragraph over and over and tinkering with it. And it was really important to me. I mean, this was the first novel that I tried to write. I had never tried writing a book before. And I knew that I wanted to finish it. You know, I think something that was really important to me was I knew that nobody was waiting for my book. You know, there are so many beautiful, good books. The world didn't care if I wrote my book or not. So I really had to bring that discipline to it. And the fact that I was able to bring that discipline and like sit down in front of this document every day for 4 years and finish it, I think I'm really proud of that I did it. And hopefully I can do it again. And what did I learn from the characters? That is an excellent question. I think part of what I learned is to not try to make them tidy. I think there are ways in which characters can surprise you if you let them. You know, you can have a character who, you know, has a backstory and is doing certain things. And this is, of course, speaking from a craft perspective. But you can have a character whose, you know, motivations and logic is completely, perfectly set up. But then you find that they want to do something that doesn't fully make sense. And it's interesting to see what happens when you let them do those things, which might surprise even themselves, because people don't always act logically, right? Like you might say that because I did this yesterday, I'm going to do this today, but then you might find that that's not true. You are surprising yourself. And so I think leaving room for surprise, even as you try to craft a persuasive character, that was important for me.
Thanks. There's a question here from Beth in the chat. Which writers have most influenced you?
Oh, you know, there are so many writers that I love, and I try to read very widely. That's one of the things that I love. So I'll read literary fiction, and I'll read science, and I'll read history, and I feel that I want to learn something from every book that I read. I love writers like Jhumpa Lahiri, Arundhati Roy, and a writer called Akwaeke Emezi, whose book I actually just read a few days ago. It's called The Death of Vivek Oji. It's a new book. I think it's just out this month. And I really, somebody's nodding. So you've heard of this book already. Yeah, okay. And maybe some of you have already read it too. For those of you who haven't, I really loved this book, and I'm thinking about it because it's a heartbreaking story. It's set in Nigeria. And what I'm so struck by is the structure of this book. I found it absolutely dazzling that the book moves back and forth in time. It handles various perspectives. It layers in mysteries and revelations, and the book has so much heart. And so, yeah, this is a book that I've been thinking about.
Tell me, one of the things I think that is really great, speaking about the sort of the books, is this is such a wonderful cover. I don't know if we can see it. How did you guys arrive at the cover? There's the train here at the very bottom.
The cover is all the genius of this artist called Tyler Comrie. I think he is absolutely fabulous. And this is actually, you know, you hear about long discussions about cover and going back and forth. And this is actually the first cover that they showed me, and I loved it. I wanted a cover that wouldn't have any kind of cliches about India, and that would, you know, be specific to the story. And I really love that, like you showed just now, they even worked in the train, which is part of the story. Yeah, I think it's really beautiful, but I had nothing to do with it.
Thanks. We've hosted a number of authors during the pandemic for these virtual events, and many of them have said that their work is just the same and their lives have not changed. Many have said that they can't work at all. What kind of work have you been having any luck on a second novel? Are you working on something right now?
I am working on a second novel. I think, you know, in the early weeks of the pandemic when we started working from home, and I wonder if others in the room feel this way, but I felt like the blurring of boundaries between home and workplace really meant that I was working on my job for hours that were too long. Like there was no cutoff point at the end of the day, because as long as you're, you know, up and about, you can respond to email. And so that was really bad, and it made me feel exhausted. So I stopped doing that. And now I think I have a better balance where I'm able to put in some writing time in the morning. And if there's anybody in the room who's trying to figure out how to find writing time, I saw advice from somebody, I can't remember now who, but it helped me a lot to treat your writing time like you have an appointment, you know, and it's just inviolable. You cannot change it. It's your appointment with yourself to sit down and write. And even if that's a half hour a day, I think you'll be surprised at how much you can get done if you allow yourself to keep that appointment with yourself every day.
I felt really bad for most of the authors who've had books come out in these last few months. And their tours have been completely messed up. A lot of books have just seemed to have been forgotten. But A Burning was not. It got to immediate acclaim. It jumped onto the bestseller list. It was a Today Show book club pick. Did you have any inkling that this was going to happen?
No. You know, I've been very surprised by the attention for this book, and very grateful. You know, it's a book set entirely in India, so while I was writing it, I didn't really know if there would be any interest in the US in such a book. And yeah, you know, I think the pandemic has been so tough. I think you're right that a lot of really good, beautiful books are not getting as much attention. You know, authors are suffering because you don't have that freedom of people walking into a bookstore and browsing and finding something that they love, you know. So we're all getting news of books through events like this, or reading magazines and reviews and that kind of thing. But yeah, this whole thing has been a surprise. And one thing that I'm really trying to figure out is, like you said, David, I think my book got really lucky. You know, there are beautiful, deserving books that don't get this level of attention. And something that I've been thinking about is, since these doors have been opened for me, you know, what can I do to hold these doors open for other writers? So if anybody has ideas, let me know.
Thank you. Please spread the word. More books like this too. I don't think I mentioned it, but I think one of you'd use the word braiding and these character arcs together, and the way they each sort of begin without power and then are beginning to negotiate it in relation to Jivan's court trial. Again, not really a question, but I just wanted to say I think that's brilliantly done. Now, one question I do want to make sure that everyone knows, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. Please type them in the comment box, or raise your hand and ask them. But the Washington Post ended its review by observing that your damning critique of a culture that doesn't have systemic change is, fortunately, all this takes place on the other side of the world and has nothing to do with us. What kind of takeaways do you want an American reader to have? You had just mentioned that you were worried that there might not be any interest, but that's clearly not the case. So,
I hope that it's a book that a reader is able to use it as an instrument for thinking about injustice in their own community, in whatever form it shows up, in whatever form choices about morals and ethics show up in your community. I hope that the book helps people think about that. And I hope the book helps people understand something about how individuals live within networks of systems and institutions. So what does freedom, what does will and determination and ambition look like when you are living in a society where everything around you is structured by certain institutions? I think that those questions have always been relevant in this country, and certainly this summer, I think those are coming to the fore. Yeah, I hope people think about injustice using it.
So we have a question from Barbara Morrow, who is actually the founder of Northshire Bookstore. So thank you, Barbara. She wanted to know if the next book that you're working on now is also set in India.
Oh my God. Hi, Barbara. Thank you so much for having me on to do this. And I hope I get to visit your stores someday. My next book is set largely in the US, I think. Very early days.
I was also wondering if I could jump in, and audience, please do feel free to put questions into the chat if you have them, or to let us know if you want to be part of the recording. But I would love to know, I mean, as an editor, that it's unusual for a debut to get all of this attention. And I've heard sometimes that when that's the case, it makes writing the next book harder. Have you found that to be the case, or are you able to sort of like put your blinders on and keep going forward?
When you were writing, I think you have to be in that space of solitude. And so that's what I've tried to do, is to really just have it be me and the page and not think about what people have said so much. But at the same time, I think it can be fuel, If I had a workspace, which I don't, I work like on my couch or at the edge of the dining table. But if I had a workspace, I might print out a couple of the good reviews, or I might, you know, have a little sticky note that says Parul Sehgal believes in you, you know, and just turn that into fuel, and just remember that some really sharp readers have faith in my ability to do this, and maybe that's good to remember. But writing is so subjective, and each book is so different, that I think in the end you can only, when you are going through that process of kind of, you know, like knocking your sentences around and seeing what feels true and what feels hollow, you only have yourself to rely on. You can only trust your own aesthetics and your own judgment. So I'm trying to stay in that space for sure.
I also had another question from Arlene, asking about books that you recommend reading. You mentioned the one, Vivek Oji, but I wondered if you had any other recommendations for us.
Yes.
Maybe some other debut authors.
I have so many recommendations. Oh my God. Sorry, I'm looking for my books. They were here. Oh, here's a really beautiful one. Sorry, I just like turned around to look at my bookshelves, but here's a really beautiful one that came out in the spring, How Much of These Hills is Gold. It has really stunning sentences. I think that's what I really loved about this book. Really gorgeous. And then I just got The Yellow House, which is nonfiction, by Sarah Broom. And if you love to read some intersection of narrative nonfiction and memoir, highly recommend this book. It's such a, it feels really, I'm still reading it. It feels really epic, but also really tender and really personal. It's a really, really beautiful book. And then, oh my God, I had my fellow debuts right here, but maybe I will just tell you the names. There's this book called Pizza Girl by Jean Kyung Fraser. I think Pizza Girl and my book were pub date buddies, same pub date in June, but I'm also reading Pizza Girl, and it's really funny. It's, if you are into kind of a sunny slash concerned with grief in a strange way, but also really hilarious book about a young person who works at a pizza store and becomes obsessed with this woman that she delivers a pizza for. I think it's a really original book that I'm really enjoying. And then I read this other really beautiful book. Oh my God, what is it called? By Sanae Lemoine. Is this ringing a bell? It's called The Margot Affair. The Margot Affair. I think it also came out in June. And it's this really elegant book. So far, it's from the perspective of a kid who realizes that her father has another family. It's set in Paris. So while we all cannot travel, if you feel like going to France, it's a really elegant book. Also a debut.
Thank you. There's a comment here in the chat from Jennifer Samuelson. She says she's afraid to say too much because she doesn't want to ruin the book for any others who haven't read it or finished it yet. But the story just really stayed with her and gave her so much to think about, particularly, and I'll spin this into a question, the final chapter between Jivan and her mother was beautiful. How did you, what were you thinking of when you were writing these chapters of this bond between the mother and Jivan, which are torturous?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. You know, one of the things that I found really moving, and I do find very moving, is that moment in life where you realize that you have become your parents' guardian, and you know, you have to protect them in the ways that they protected you. And I think there is something so profound in that flip when it happens. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about when I wrote that chapter.
I have another question for you about the writing of it here. Please, if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to jump in, or type them in the chat. What kind of research did you do? I was thinking about the jails and those elements. We have that in there.
YouTube is a treasure trove of informal, kind of rough videos that give you such a good sense for what places look like and what their textures are. So, you know, places that I didn't have access to, like a kitchen in a women's prison, for instance, or like a TV room in a prison. I found these YouTube videos of local news channels in India which went to these prisons, and you know, they filmed the interiors and they were doing like little news segments on them, and they were so useful. And then I also read, again coming back to my anthropology background and my love of ethnographies, I read ethnographies about Hijra communities, really good ethnographies by writers like Gayatri Reddy and Vaibhav Saria. And ethnographies are so good for doing research because the writers are so attentive to, you know, the lived experience of people.
Did you find yourself having a hard time cutting yourself off from research? Or was it easy to say, oh, no, that's enough. I know what I need to know. I can stop now.
I think so part of the reason that I moved away from academia is I realized that I like storytelling more than research. So it was very easy for me to say, okay, that's enough. I have what I need, and step away from it. Yeah, I don't think I'm the kind of writer who does a ton of research. And you know, so much of the book also felt really personal to me. I was really drawing upon what I knew from having grown up there. And my parents still live there, and I visit them every year. I don't know if I'll be able to visit this year, but you know, I feel like India is still a place that is very close to me. And so I was writing from memory a lot.
There's a question here from Teresa. She says, there's been so many novels in the last few years that are told with multiple perspectives, multiple narrators, like The Other Americans, They're There, The Travelers, Sing, Unburied, Sing. Why did you choose to write in that form, and what do you think it signifies? Why do you think it signifies that it's become so popular?
Wow. You sound like a huge reader, Teresa, just like those names just popped into your head of like 5 novels that use the same form. I love that. I chose to write in that form because I wanted to convey a sense for how, so I wanted to make sure that the world of this novel felt big. And in fact, I had to narrow it down to 3 characters because I realized that 3 is the greatest number that I can write with any depth and do justice to their narrative arcs. But the book also has these minor characters who get a bit of space now and then. And that's all just to gesture at how this is a world that is full of these complex stories. You know, you can follow any one of them if you want. And these are the 3 that I chose to follow. I don't know why it's a popular form. I mean, it might have something to do with, you know, again, trying to acknowledge different perspectives and different truths and trying to build complexity in the book, you know, where if you have all of these different people, you can show more parts of this fictional world than you can if you are limited to one character and their journey, maybe.
So
Somebody's asked.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, go right ahead.
I was just going to say that somebody asked if I've read A Fine Balance, and I really loved that book too. It's a great novel.
And I was just jumping in to say we are just about out of time, unfortunately. Teresa let us know that she is a high school English teacher. So that makes perfect sense. Hi, Teresa.
Those are some very cool books that you're teaching.
Yeah, I want to come take your class. That sounds like a lot more fun than English classes I took.
It says she's teaching a burning next year.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, what an honor.
But I think we should wrap up with one last question. And I have one, I just scrolled past it. One last one from Arlene, asking if you weren't an editor or a writer, what would you be doing with your life? Is there something else that would have been a dream for you? And I think that's a great one to close on.
Oh, I love that question. I think I might have been a surgeon. I love reading medical narratives. I love reading, books by Atul Gawande and Siddharth Mukherjee and writers like that. And I think there's something so appealing about having this incredible knowledge and being so concretely useful, being able to apply your knowledge in a way that so, concretely helps somebody.
That's very cool, though I think I can speak for all of us in saying that we're glad that you chose the path of writer. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining us this evening. This has been a real treat and a lovely event and a great chance to hear more about your book. So thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for coming. I know that we're all spending a lot of screen time these days and might be, kind of exhausting sometimes, but I really appreciate your coming out. And thank you, Rachel. Thank you, David, for the most thoughtful, generous questions. And thank you, Barbara, for being here. It's so lovely to meet you in this way.
Thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. And y'all take care, and we'll see you at another Northshire Live soon. And thank you again, Megha.
Yep, we've got Lisa. Oh, we've got Lisa Sellen Davis here tomorrow for her book Tomboy. So come on back then, and we'll see you all soon. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Take care. Good evening.